Alright, welcome back to the next episode of Rejoice Always, episode 5. Um, as is apparently obvious, probably, I'm in a new spot. I finally moved out of my friend's house that I was staying in and got my own place. I had just been waiting a few months for the lease to actually take effect, so we're here now. This is a work in progress, this room. I've got the flag behind me and like my board over here to help me remember what the heck I'm supposed to be doing, but there's probably going to be some other stuff that goes up on the walls over here just to make it a little bit more cozy, I guess. I've also got a better pair of headphones here, and I'm going to be getting a microphone at some point, so it's not this very low-end Logitech headphone, or headphones and microphone, whatever. I'd prefer a bit of better quality, at least audio quality. I'm sure anybody watching would too. Anyway, this episode, I wanted to talk about a couple things. Imagine that. And I've got the next few episodes laid out, but when I was going over it and writing down stuff for these episodes, I didn't write down all that much, so there's probably just going to be a bunch of rambling for this episode. I guess I should just jump into the content and not worry so much about rambling because, well, this is a podcast, not really a syndicated TV show or anything. I'm not really doing much editing yet. And speaking of editing, real quick, I've been trying out a bunch of different software programs to try and see which one works the best for me, what I can grasp the best in terms of editing. But I've had some problems with the videos so far and just figuring out the software, so that's why the last episode and the one before that were not really edited at all. I think I added some text. No, I added some text on the thumbnail, but not even on the video, so there's a lot of work I have to do on that front, trying to figure out exactly what to do. But I'll get there, and the audio quality and the video quality will hopefully get a lot better at the same time. So here we go. Episode 5. My first note here says, God created time for us. Time's in all caps, but I'm not talking about the magazine. What I wanted to talk about here and what I remember about what I had been thinking of previously was if we think about all of the things that are in our universe that we find so majestic and so wonderful, all of those in some way can point us to God, I think. You know, if you take a look at the absolute vastness of space, I think that was used by God as a way to show us how much He loves us, because if you really study how vast space is and how crazy all the stuff out there is, and how crazy it is that we have life on this tiny little rock, and then you read in the Bible where it says, my love is, oh geez, now I can't remember it, but it's that God's love for us is greater than the heavens and numbers more than the stars or something like that. Another thing I gotta get better at is actual Bible quotes and putting them up on screen and prepping for my episodes. Anyway, that wasn't what I was going to talk about. The universe that we live in is, to our knowledge, unending, but all of it was created for us. And that's laid out in the Bible. God says that in the Bible. And that also includes time. So the way I like to think about God when I'm trying to think about how He views us and our universe and how He performs miracles and all that kind of stuff, I think about it like this. So if you've ever seen a timeline, maybe in I don't know, math class or something. You have a timeline that starts at X and ends at Y. Um, one straight line with a bunch of ticks on it all the way down. You can kind of imagine that as a timeline of human history from the beginning, Adam and Eve, or really from the beginning of Genesis into Revelation. That is the bookends of what our time on Earth and in this universe will be, because that is the creation of humans and the um, gathering of them back into the heavens. And we can't view any of that timeline from outside it because we're inside it. This is actually kind of coincides with, or not coincides. It's similar to thinking about the fourth and fifth and sixth dimensions, if we can think about that kind of stuff, because it kind of fries your brain if you think about it too much. Um, but this is about time, not about space. And I keep getting off track here, but there's so much that I could talk about because this stuff is super interesting. I'll come back to it in a second, but I want to get my actual point out. So we have a timeline from the beginning of humans to the end of humans, and we are always on that timeline. We cannot leave that timeline. We cannot really affect it even, because we live on that timeline somewhere. If this is the beginning and the end, somewhere here, beginning and end, somewhere in there is a tiny little timeline of my life or someone else's life or someone else's life before or after me, you know? So God is outside that timeline. He has to be, because any creator has to be outside of the thing that they create. I think there's a technical term for that assertion in logistics and in apologetics, but I don't know what it is. But if you imagine um, someone who makes pottery, why can't I think I can't think of the name of the job. A potterer, I guess. A potter, sure. Uh, they make the pot, but they're not a part of that. They're not in the pot. It's separate from them, and they give it to somebody else, and there you go. There's a pot, but the creator is separated from that pot. In the same way, God created the universe, but he's separated from the universe, so he can't be subject to anything that goes on inside that universe. If somebody writes a book, they have a universe or whatever inside that book that they've created. Or same thing works with paintings or video games or videos even. There's this little pocket universe inside this book or painting or video game or podcast, whatever. And the person who created that is outside. I think that's a good enough illustration of that. So God is not subject to time. He is outside it. So I kind of look at it like, this isn't exactly accurate, and I don't really know a better way of picturing it, but I imagine a big sphere, and this sphere is the heavens. Now, in Genesis it says that God split the heavens and the earth, and they're separate, but this just helps me visualize it. So if I imagine one big sphere as all of creation, that's a better way of thinking about it, all of creation, and God is in here in this sphere, and the universe that houses us is in here. So I don't really have anything. Actually, I've got something on my desk that might help. Okay, so this is God. This is a person. It's the best I have on my desk right now. And this is our universe. So this can contain things. It's containing us. This is just a single entity. This is God. This is our universe. God created the universe. He's separated from it, and he interacts with it. Maybe you could say that him going into the universe here is Jesus, but that's neither here nor there. So he can see the beginning from the end because he's looking at the entire timeline. If you look at a piece of paper with a timeline of events written on it from, I don't know, let's say it's a timeline of events of World War II, you can see the beginning of it because it says in 1944. Here's the start of it, and over here it says in 1948, here's the end. Here's all the things that happened in between. Well, if I'm looking at a piece of paper that has all those ticks on it and has the timeline of World War II on it, I can read it. I can see all this stuff happening at the same time for me, even though it was 4 years apart for all these people, but I'm not inside that timeline. God is special because he can not only see our timeline, but he can affect things in it. He can actually go down into the timeline as a person himself, and he did, which is crazy. But the point I wanted to get at was God is eternal. He's not affected by time. He created time. Time, a lot of us say, is the fourth dimension, I believe. I think that's what we learn in physics. So the first dimension, well, there's not really any specific stuff for the first dimension, but we live in 3 dimensions, height, width, and depth. And then we see in 2 dimensions because anything that you see is flat. Even though it might be a 3D object, your vision of it is flat. Pictures are flat, for example. We don't really experience the first dimension as far as I know, in a solitary way. I'm not really sure about that. But anyway, we're in the 3rd dimension. We live in the 3rd dimension. We are 3-dimensional beings, but the 4th dimension is time. I think that's the way that it's usually said in physics class, or maybe at least in science fiction. So God created us, which is crazy in and of itself, but he also created time when he created our universe. So he created time for us. A lot of people say, what's the famous quote, that the most valuable thing that we have on earth is time, something like that. You know, we could have money, we could have power, we could have all these things, but everybody has a limited supply of time. But God created that for us. And it's my belief that he wants any of us that would want to come to him to come to him. And he is also perfectly merciful. So there's no reason to assume that anybody that might want to come to God won't be able to. They have a timeline in their life from when they're born to when they die. Somewhere along there, they're going to experience God if it's what God knows they want. Because God, again, can see the beginning from the end. So, he can see... I'll take my life as an example because it's really easy to talk about. He saw the beginning of my life, and he does see the end of my life. Luckily, it hasn't happened yet for me, but he knows the end of my life because he sees this entire timeline. He knew the exact moment that I would give myself to him. He knew the exact moment that I would become a Christian, and I would stop doing all the stupid things I was doing before. And even if that moment had been at the very last moment of my life, God would he would interrupt my life to make himself known to me in some way or another. I don't know about modern day miracles all that much. I've heard some people say they don't happen, and I've heard some people say they do. And there's certainly plenty of anecdotal evidence that seems to suggest that they do. But I think that's kind of a secondary issue. You know, if God needed to reach out to somebody that was going to accept him by miracle, then he would. In my case, it was showing me that the fruits of my labor, having not been pointed towards God, were leading me down a bad path. And God knew that, and he put things into my life to point me in that direction. There's a popular question among agnostics, atheists, and ignorant or just uneducated Christians. which is that what about the people that have what about the people that are in uncivilized societies, like in the middle of Africa, someone's in a tribe somewhere, or maybe a remote tribe in the Aboriginals in Australia, or I don't know, someone out in a tiny little island in Indonesia, or the tundra of Russia. It doesn't matter where, but they're talking about remote people, people that have never heard the gospel. What about people who never hear the gospel before they die? There were certainly people like that before Jesus came, but I don't think God would have missed that. I don't think he would have missed that opportunity to bring people closer to him, even though those people in the beginning didn't know Christ yet, or the people that we have now don't know Christ because they're remote from Christianity. In those cases, in the past miracles happened. In the present day, they may or may not. I'm not really sure. People talk about having dreams. I just saw a video from David Wood on YouTube. He's a great YouTuber. Check him out if you get the opportunity. He does a lot of stuff about the clashes between Christianity and Islam, and there's this, or maybe it was him, maybe it wasn't. Anyway, he probably will cover it at some point if he hasn't already, but there's something like 6 million, an estimation of course, but 6 million Muslims a year that are turning to Christ, and there's anecdotal evidence of pastors in these countries, whether it's in the Middle East or Africa, that have entire churches where their congregations are people who came to Christ because of dreams they had. So this is, if you take somewhere like Zimbabwe, I believe. I think Zimbabwe is a very Islamic country, but there's plenty of countries in Africa that are, and plenty of countries in the Middle East that are. You take these places that are very hostile to Christianity, where if somebody grows up in a rural setting, they will never read a Bible. They will never go to an actual church unless they have a dream, a vision, a miracle. I don't know. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence. And if I didn't say it already, I think it was not just 6 million, but 6 million people a year in recent times. I think it was Dinesh D'Souza, actually, that had a video about that. He's got a podcast. I think it's just called the Dinesh D'Souza podcast, if I'm not mistaken. But I saw a clip on his YouTube channel. That's fascinating stuff. And so, let me try to tie this back in with the time stuff I was talking about. God knows the perfect time to come into anybody's life to have them brought to him, if they are going to be brought to him. Because remember, there are certainly people out there who will never come to Christ. They never want to. They will always reject him. And it's so unfortunate and so sad. But it happens. That you've got, the primeval example is Lucifer. He was an angel of God. He is an angel of light. He was very powerful. And he turned from God. He led a third of the angels away. A third of the angels in heaven away from God. And he will never go back to God. He can never be reconciled. And it's not God's choice to keep him unreconciled. The angels have free choice as well, just like we humans do. And Lucifer will always choose to turn away from God. So there's people like that on earth that will always choose to turn away from God. And anybody that isn't in that camp, that might someday turn to God, whether it's the first chance they get or on their deathbed, God knows that the appointed time to come into their life. And he also knows the appointed time to come into the world again. I've been ravenously reading a series called the Left Behind series. And there's certainly some artistic license taken with it. It's fiction, and it's not a substitute for scripture, but it covers the subject of Revelation, the book of Revelation, and what could potentially happen. Um, it's a fictional universe, but it takes us on a ride with these characters, experiencing what would happen um, per the author's interpretation. Not if, but when Revelation happens. So it's my belief that the subject and the symbology of Revelation is, in some cases, in some spots, to be taken pretty literally. For example, I think when it says that an earthquake will happen, that will happen all around the globe, then I think that's pretty literal. I think when it talks about a lamb with 7 horns and 7 eyes, maybe it could be an actual lamb with 7 horns and 7 eyes, but it's clearly symbology of Jesus. So there is symbology and literal interpretations in Revelation, as there are in all the books of the Bible. Actually, I don't know if that's true, if it's in all the books of the Bible, but certainly across the Bible there are many examples of both literal interpretation and symbology. Anyway, it's my belief that it's more literal in Revelation than symbolic, and there is a big debate in Christianity about millennialism. So from my understanding, there's amillennialists or amillennialist, premillennialists, postmillennialists, and then there's kind of a fourth class, but not really in the same boat as the other one, that's called Preterists. Preterists is kind of the easiest one to talk about. Well, they're all not that difficult, but Preterists believe that the events of Revelation happened already, and it's descriptions of things that happened in the past. Doesn't mean that the second coming won't happen, but they believe that all that stuff might happen, or already did happen. And there's probably sects of that, subsects of that believe different things, so it's kind of hard to just say, here's what preterists believe, but I'm trying to summarize it as best as I can because, again, I'm trying to tie it back into the whole timeline thing. So you have preterists, you've got premillennialists, which believe, and the millennium that it's talking about is the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. So the premillennialists believe that all of the believers on earth, when the second coming happens, will be raptured, and then tribulation will happen to those that are left. More believers will be brought about, and then Christ will come and reign for 1,000 years on earth. And then Satan will be thrown into the lake of fire, and then we all go up into heaven, and yay, we live for eternity. Postmillennialists believe, let me make sure I get this correct. Postmillennialists believe that 1,000-year reign on earth will happen before anybody goes to heaven. So tribulation might happen to both believers and non-believers here on earth, but then we will be taken to heaven with Christ. And amillennialists believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the 1,000-year reign on earth is symbolic, and that we will just be brought to heaven. And then it's just kind of like, that's it. Which kind of sounds like preterists, actually. So, I'm not really sure. I'm not the authority on this. This is just stuff that I'm remembering, and it's all coming from up here, so forgive me if that's incorrect, but Preterists, there's a pastor that I know about on YouTube. It's Apologia Studios. Don't remember the pastor's name. I think it's Jeff. I think that's what he believes. I remember seeing a video of his talking about that, and I don't really agree. I agree with preterists in the assertion that the stuff in Revelation could be depictions of stuff that happened in the past, but I still think that there's a pretty literal tribulation coming. Amillennialists, a good example of which is Vadi Baucham, I believe. He's with the Southern Baptist Convention. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's an amillennialist. Actually, there was nothing more I was going to say about that, really. What's his name? Dang it, I can't remember his name right now. It's something Douglas. It's not Jack Douglas. That's someone else. Shoot. He's got a YouTube channel called Blog and Mablog. I can't remember his name right now. But anyway, he's a postmillennialist. And then you have the authors of the book series that I've been reading that are premillennialists. Jerry Jenkins and Tim LaHaye. Jerry B. Jenkins and Tim LaHaye. Yeah. So you've got Jeff, I want to say. Or you got Apologia Studios that are preterists. You've got Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins that are premillennialists. Blog and Mablog that is postmillennialist. Vadi Baucham that is amillennialist. And oh, that was it. So this is definitely a secondary issue in Christianity, maybe even a tertiary issue. It's not something that would cause someone to be brought into or left out of the kingdom of God, I think. But clearly there are different interpretations on what the timing of God is going to be, what's going to happen, and all that when it comes to Revelation. And I know that this has been a big topic in recent months. And maybe it's a big topic all the time, I'm not really sure. I've certainly looked into it a lot more because I was doubtful about the stuff that's been happening in America and around the world because of COVID. I don't think that there's really a need for panic. Personally, I don't think that now is the time of the Great Tribulation or the end of times or the last days. Vadi Baucham, by the way, here's the point I wanted to make about amillennialists that I'm remembering now. He says that we are in the last days. We always have been, ever since Christ died. That's what amillennialists believe. That's right. Ever since Christ died, that's the last days from Christ's death to the second coming, and then we all go up into heaven. So those are the last days. That's the Great Tribulation. So you can pick any one of those you want. Doesn't really affect your salvation. Doesn't at all affect your salvation. Might affect what books you read or who you talk to or who you listen to, and that's fine. As I've demonstrated, I listen to people who have all four of those interpretations. So it's important not to divide yourself from other Christians because of secondary issues like that, or to divide yourself from other Christians at all. So, back to the timeline thing. We have different interpretations of what God is going to do when he comes back. But God knows the perfect time. And for anybody out there that might be listening to this, that might think, I'm not good enough, God will never reach out to me, or how could God not reach out to other people who are distant or remote or whatever, and use that as a reason to reject God. I would posit to you that in the Bible it says God knows the hour, the year, the month, the day, and the hour to come back. Not in those words exactly. I'm frankly terrible at remembering verses. I'm not very good at it yet, but I believe that God will come back at the very moment that all of the people who are ever going to go to heaven are saved and have made that decision. So I like giving analogies and examples. I think it helps me visualize and think about things a lot better, so bear with me while I try giving an example or an analogy to this. Imagine that you have a large room with 1,000 people in it, and you've got one door on this side and one door on that side, and everybody has to make a choice which door to leave out of. This one says good and this one says bad. I'm just making this up as we go along. So you have a good door and a bad door, and everybody has to make a choice to leave the room. Doesn't matter why. That's just an analogy. So let's say you've got a little control box, like a control room where you can oversee this building, and you've got someone in there who controls a conveyor belt on the floor that will push people to either exit. That person would be representing God. All the people in the room are representing us humans, and obviously the good door is heaven, the bad door is hell. People, as time goes on, will choose and walk out those doors. Some people will stay in the room. But if you've got, say, 500 people that walk to the good door, 450 that walk to the bad door, and you got 50 people left, God's not just going to say, oh, well, I'm going to make the conveyor belt shoot them all towards the bad door because they haven't chosen yet, and now we're done. Just because they haven't heard or something like that, you know. God will reach out, I believe, to everybody that could ever choose to go to the good door, not the bad door. He knows all of our hearts. He knows us better than we know ourselves. So, if you got 50 people left in that room, say the controller happens to know that 12 of them will be saved and go out the good door, and the rest will go out the bad door. So he waits. A lot of time passes by, la-di-da-di-da. Oh, look, 11 of them have gone and there's one left and he's walking over there. As soon as that guy gets out the door and goes to heaven, conveyor belts go on, everybody else goes to hell. Those people would not have chosen heaven anyway. Keep that in mind. They would not have chosen. They cannot have chosen heaven. It is their free choice to go to heaven or hell, and God knows them and says, oh, well, you're not going to choose me ever? Then, okay, I'm not going to force you to go to heaven. You're going where you want. The other people are going where they want. That is the time when God will come back. And I find it so fascinating and so wonderful that the timeline we live in was created for us. The other note I had in here says, God created us for a relationship with Him. Why did God create us? I mean, I just wrote that, but God created us because it pleased Him? Because He wanted to? He's God. He made the entire universe. You don't get to decide why God made us or not. That's not something any of us can really know, except for Him saying that He loves us and He wants a relationship with us. And when I say relationship, I don't mean a romantic relationship. I mean, well, I was going to say familial, like a family relationship, but it's more than that. He's God. It's a spiritual relationship. He wants us to be
one with him spiritually. It's not something that's easily understood if you just talk about it in worldly terms, but he wants a relationship with us. He created us for that reason, and he gives us free choice to pick him or not. And he knows the exact time to come in, the exact perfect time to come in, so that everybody that would ever want to do what he wants us to do will have that. And maybe some people would object to that and say, well, I don't want to do what God does, so isn't it cruel of him to say you're going to burden hell for eternity for not doing what I want? And there's so much conversation that could come out of that. And I'm going to wrap it up here in a second. I don't want to get into all of that conversation now, and I think I've talked about that before, if I'm not mistaken. But I'll just say, God is good. He is perfectly good. He is also perfectly just. The last thing I wrote on my notes there is justice versus love. God is perfectly just, and he loves all of us, but love does not mean it's easy. Love does not mean giving us whatever we want. Love can be tough. Love can be so tough that you choose eternity in hell, and he says, okay, bye. God does not submit to our demands, and he created us, and he created this universe, so we don't have any authority over him. We are not his counselors. We're not his authority. We're not the creators of God. So, might be a harsh answer for some out there, if they're wondering about that. I would say there's a great app called Got Questions from gotquestions.org. There's a guy named Frank Turek, who is another guy I listen to. I don't know where he stands on the millennialism debate, but he is an apologist. He's such a good apologist. He's so good about breaking all this stuff down into tiny little snippets of information that everybody can understand. He travels around. He's been traveling around recently, actually, to different colleges and giving presentations, and they're just so good. They're so easy to understand. I don't know if he created gotquestions.org or if he just recommends it, but I got it from him, and I trust him, and I've tried the app, and it looks pretty good. But there's so many questions. There are so many questions out there that would stop people from joining Christianity just because they don't understand the nature of the answer. They don't understand why it would be that way, and they think it's cruel. For example, the thing with remote people. But that app is a good way to point people to the right answer, because the Bible's a big book, and you can't just go, God, what's the answer to this? And open up the book and hope you're going to be at the right place, because God doesn't work like that. He doesn't acquiesce to our demands. So, gotquestions.org, Got Questions app. Great place to start for anybody out there that's searching. For any Christians that are out there and looking for answers to the secondary issues. There's Christians out there that are saved, but I'm just wondering, like, hey, what about this? And that's a great place to start. So I think that was a much more coherent and lucid podcast episode than I've had in the past. I know that in the past I tended to be a lot less energetic and have more pauses. But, I've got 5 episodes. It's not a whole bunch of stuff. I'm learning to do this, but I've had a lot of fun with it. And I'm glad that I can just make myself sit down and talk, because it's really fun to just talk about this kind of stuff. Helps me, helps anybody that might be listening. So, I appreciate anybody out there that might be listening to me, because currently it's not that many. But, it's getting late and it's about time I should go get some dinner. So, to anybody that's watching, I thank you for being here, and God bless and amen.